A genius girl with an IQ of 300 plus unexpectedly becomes the heir to her uncle's secret armory, and all his enemies, who now want her dead. The first episode takes place in a rural area. The screen shows a house with broken walls and shattered windows. A voice over a loudspeaker announces a firearms training session at a nearby base, accompanied by alarm sounds. The voice reminds the soldiers that they must train to protect their country and apologizes for any inconvenience, asking residents to temporarily evacuate to a safe location. A group of armed men walks across the fields surrounding the house, singing different tunes and joking with each other. In the distance, on a bridge, a van is parked. Inside, a sniper adjusts the sight on his rifle, aiming at the small house. He's distracted by a radio transmission. A male voice announces the start of a rabbit hunt, with a target 950 meters away. The sniper, frustrated, looks at the device before returning to his weapon. He takes aim and shoots. The bullet speeds toward the house, crashing through the window and narrowly missing a young woman. A portrait of a family on the wall shatters, and the girl, clutching her head, darts behind a wall. The sniper smirks as he watches. In a panic, she spots a pistol nearby, and across from her, a wounded girl sitting against the wall. A little further away, a young man lies unconscious. Determined to reach the weapon, she crawls toward it, but another shot knocks the pistol out of her hand, forcing her to hide again. Trembling with fear, she closes her eyes and is suddenly lost in memories. She's sitting on a couch with a man, watching an action movie. She laughs at how the hero manages to dodge all the bullets, but the man explains that he's simply using blind spots to move safely. Remembering his words, the girl opens her eyes and starts scanning the room. She grabs a mop and wraps a piece of broken mirror around it, carefully extending it. She's immediately shot at. She repeats the maneuver several times, raising the mirror higher each time. Through this, she figures out where the sniper is shooting from. The man in the van finally realizes her plan and asks his driver to move a little forward. Meanwhile, the girl identifies the sniper's blind spots and climbs onto the refrigerator. Gathering her courage, she leaps toward the couch just as the sniper fires again, but this time, the bullet misses. She lands safely on the couch, though her back hits it hard. The sniper, frustrated, reloads his weapon. As she attempts to retrieve the pistol, now pushed under the couch, Gian flips it over and discovers a sniper rifle instead. When the sniper looks through his scope again, he sees the girl aiming right back at him. A moment later, she fires. In one of the police stations, Gian sits while a few officers try to hold a young man. He accuses her of beating him up. A female officer approaches and informs Gian that once they review the surveillance footage, she'll be released. As the police review the footage, they see that the man intentionally entered the women's restroom after a girl. The girl runs out in fear, followed by the victim, and then Gian. She catches up with him and beats him up. Not seeing herself as guilty, Gian asks the officer again when she'll be allowed to go home. The officer replies that she shouldn't have done that and should have detained him and called the police. Now, the man wants to sue her. She needs someone from her family to help. Reluctantly, she takes out her phone and calls her uncle. However, instead of him, she's greeted by Officer Park Jin-woo from the station, who informs her that her uncle, Jong Jin-man, has passed away. Sitting in the back of a car, Gian is lost in her memories. She recalls her uncle installing metal bars on her window. She doesn't understand why, asking which crazy person would climb up to the 5th floor. She also dislikes the wardrobe he bought for her. It's ugly, unstylish, and doesn't suit the room of a 20-year-old girl. Her uncle smirks and says it's made of iron and bulletproof. If there's ever a shootout, she can hide in it. Laughing at his words, Gian changes the topic and mentions that the store owner who swindled her out of money got into a severe accident and suffered multiple injuries. After that, he agreed to repay her and others. Listening to his niece, Jin-man says it was him who broke the store owner's arms and legs, but Gian assumes he's joking. Seeing her uncle taking a photo of her student ID, she angrily grabs it from him. He, ignoring her emotions, tells her to remember his badge number. He repeats the digits several times aloud so she would memorize them. Back in the present, Gian realizes that these were the last words her uncle spoke to her. Her thoughts are interrupted by the taxi driver. He mentions that he knew her uncle, as they went to school together, and asks how Jin-man is doing. Looking down, Gian quietly responds that her uncle has passed away. After driving her to her destination, the taxi driver suggests a good funeral home and hands her his business card. At the hospital morgue, Gian is asked to identify her uncle's body. She notices a wound on his neck, finding it odd. Suicides usually cut their wrists. A police officer explains that they initially suspected murder too, but surveillance footage from the past week showed no one near his house. Moreover, the autopsy report indicated that, given the angle of the wound, he could have inflicted it himself. The case was closed as a suicide. The officer offers to email her the details, but Gian declines, deciding it suits her uncle's style. As his body is slid back into the cooler, she notices a tattoo on his neck that reads "Murder Help" and is surprised she hadn't seen it before. After the morgue, Gian visits a funeral home to arrange the ceremony. Lost in thought, she's brought back to reality when the director asks for a photo of the deceased for the portrait. Arriving at her uncle's house, Gian hesitates on the porch, unable to step inside. She sits on the steps, lost in thought, when a voice startles her. It's a young man introducing himself as Bae Young Min, an old childhood friend. Together, they enter the house and find a family photo, from which Young Min crafts a portrait of Jin Man. He reveals that he recently worked for her uncle, updating a website for selling agricultural hoses. He was still working when Jin Man died, making him the last person in contact with him. The police even called him first. Young Min mentions that Jin Man was found in the bathtub and asks if Jian has cleaned it yet. When she says no, he offers to handle it so she can focus on the funeral. Grateful, she agrees. At the funeral, Jin Man's old friends, including the taxi driver, show up. Jian greets them respectfully, listening as they discuss who sent flowers. One bouquet stands out, sent by someone named Li Yong Han, whom none of them recognize. The taxi driver openly remarks on this. Before they can speculate further, the funeral director announces more guests have arrived, prompting Jian to greet them. Outside, a mysterious man smokes a cigarette, murmuring a farewell to Jin Man, promising they'll meet again in hell. Back inside, guests are seated at tables. Jian notices a pair of twins sitting apart from everyone, not engaging with the others. Meanwhile, Young Min cleans the bathroom. While wiping down the cabinet, he notices a bloody fingerprint. Carefully opening it, he finds a hidden mobile phone. A drunk cab driver starts screaming and crying in front of a portrait of his friend. The others notice his behavior and start speculating. Maybe the deceased owed him money, or perhaps they were lovers. Soon, the conversation shifts to why Jin Man might have taken his own life. Maybe his hose selling business went under. They also toss around a few rumors about him. Was he a gangster or an anti-North spy? Their chatter is interrupted by the cab driver, who reminds everyone that their fathers once blew all their money at the local gambling den. His own dad tried to burn coal in the house, nearly suffocating them all. That's when Jin Man showed up with a bag full of cash. Stunned, the men go quiet. They never knew their friend had saved them. Listening to this, Jian realizes she lived with her uncle for 10 years but barely knew him. After the farewell, Jin Man's casket is sent to the crematorium. Outside, Jian lights a cigarette. Jiang Min walks up and says he'll join her at the cemetery. Once they've collected the urn, they board a bus. During the ride, Jin Man's friends whisper among themselves, puzzled by how Jian hasn't shed a single tear. Back at her uncle's house, Jiang Min mentions he scrubbed the entire bathtub. He tells Jian she's holding up really well, but Jian admits she despised her uncle, or rather, how he died. She immediately regrets saying it and thanks Jiang Min again for his help. As she walks through the house, she finds her old clothes and memories of her uncle come flooding back. Overwhelmed by grief, she breaks down, sobbing. Jiang Min, who had stepped out, returns to find her like this. He starts to leave but Jian asks him to stay. After a while, she falls asleep on his shoulder. Once Jian calms down, Jiang Min shows her an old cell phone he found. She's surprised, it's ancient, from before they both got new phones. She doubts it even works. Just then, a message comes in. When she opens it, she reads that someone paid Jin Man 70 million won and is expecting their goods. Another message shows a bank balance that leaves her stunned. Handing the phone to Jiang Min, she asks him to read it. He confirms it, 18.7 billion won. After thinking for a moment, Jian asks to see a website linked in the messages. As they dig deeper, they both realize there's no way selling hoses could have made the kind of money. Jiang Min suggests the website might be a front. He digs into the site's code, runs some operations, and finds a hidden page on the dark web called Mur the Help. Jian remembers the same word was tattooed on her uncle's leg. Exploring the page, they discover it's an arms dealer's site. Suddenly, a message pops up from a buyer. Jian replies, saying the store is closed and offers to refund their money. The buyer immediately catches on, Jin Man is dead, and tells Jian she's going to die today too. Panicking, Jiang Min shuts the site down and suggests they call the police. At that moment, the doorbell rings. Jian walks to the intercom and picks up the receiver. A woman's voice comes through. She introduces herself as Seo Min Hei, a Chinese language tutor, claiming they have a lesson scheduled today. The woman stands by the slightly open gate, a pistol tucked inside her bag. Not trusting this unexpected visitor, Jian refuses to let her in and tells her to leave. Suddenly, a message arrives on her phone. It's from an unknown sender, warning her not to let anyone else kill her. They want to do it themselves. The next moment, Jian hears banging and sees Min Hei knocking on the front door. Meanwhile, a fleet of drones equipped with cameras and weapons is heading toward the house. Flashback to when Jian was 7 years old. The whole family is having dinner with Jin Man, who has just returned after nearly 8 years of silence. His brother is furious, demanding to know why he disappeared without a word. He had assumed Jin Man had become a sailor and died at sea. His wife steps in, urging him to calm down. Jin Man turns to his young niece and asks if she knows his name. When she says no, he repeats it several times, telling her to remember it. In response, the little girl sticks out her tongue and grins at her uncle. Episode 2, Minute Hei pulls up to Jin Man's house in her car. She opens the trunk, takes out a remote control, and sends a swarm of drones toward the house. Then, she grabs a rifle and takes aim. Jin Man attends his mother's funeral. He feels something is off about her death and suggests to his brother that they have an autopsy performed. His brother disagrees, insisting there's nothing unusual. She had been sick for a long time. and the doctor warned them to prepare for the worst. She only seemed to improve briefly after her son came back. Their argument is interrupted by Ji-yeon's mother, who urges them to calm down. Just then, Ji-yeon breaks something nearby. Her mother scolds her and asks Jin-man to take her home. As Jin-man and Ji-yeon leave, a man arrives at the funeral. He offers his condolences and introduces himself as an old friend of Jin-man's. Ji-yeon's parents exchange wary glances while the man smiles coldly. Later that night, Ji-yeon lies awake in her bed, unable to sleep. She wanders into the next room and finds her uncle watching TV. She asks him about her grandmother, struggling to believe they'll never see her again. Jin-man replies that everyone dies someday, and death isn't something to fear. At that moment, a program about barking hyenas surrounding a silent lion comes on. Using it as an example, Jin-man explains, "Only the weak make noise, the strong stay silent." Their conversation is interrupted by a phone call. Jin-man listens for a moment before telling Ji-yeon that he needs to leave to help her parents. He mentions that a friend of his will come by soon, but before she lets him in, she must give him a riddle to solve. Ji-yeon picks a riddle and shares the answer with her uncle. Jin-man promises he'll return soon and leaves. Some time later, a strange man approaches the apartment door. Ji-yeon hears him fiddling with the lock and asks who he is, but he stays silent. Nervous, she recites the riddle, but still no response. She backs away in fear as the man picks the lock and steps into the hallway. Before he can do anything, someone pulls him back onto the staircase and slams the door shut. Terrified, Ji-yeon hears the sounds of a fight. A few minutes later, a young man enters and introduces himself as her uncle's friend. He types the correct answer to her riddle on his phone and shows it to her, asking her to hide in her room. No sooner does she shut the door than another assassin enters the apartment. From her hiding spot, Ji-yeon hears another scuffle. Peeking out, she watches in horror as one man cuts off her uncle's friend's arm. Panicking, she retreats deeper into her hiding place, trembling with fear. As soon as the criminals take out Ji-yeon's protector, they enter her room and start searching it. One of them notices the open window and realizes she escaped through it. Looking outside, he spots her. She's clinging to a pipe on the side of the building. Reaching out, he tries to coax her back inside, but she lets go and falls. Luckily, a couch on the ground below breaks her fall. Once she hits the street, she takes off running. One of the criminals chases after her. Reaching a small intersection, Ji-yeon runs straight into traffic and gets hit by a car. A crowd quickly gathers around her, and she's rushed to the hospital. There, she briefly regains consciousness and overhears two police officers talking. They mention she's the daughter of a couple who were murdered at a funeral home. When her parents didn't come home, Ji-yeon went out to find them. She supposedly has an uncle, but he's missing, and his social security benefits have been cancelled. The next time Ji-yeon opens her eyes, it's nighttime. She sees a hyena creeping toward her with a bloody hand in its jaws. Just as it gets close, she wakes up. At that moment, the killer approaches her hospital room. Quietly, he draws a weapon and slips inside. When he reaches her bed, he realizes she's gone again. Meanwhile, Ji-yeon is running as fast as she can, but he's right behind her. She reaches a dead end and tugs on the first door she finds. It's locked. She moves to the next one and sees it leads to the morgue. Slipping inside, she heads to the cold storage units and glances back at the door. With no other choice, she opens one of the compartments and climbs in. Moments later, the killer enters and scans the room. Ji-yeon lies still in the compartment, her eyes fixed on the body next to her. It's her mother, covered with a sheet. The man starts checking the storage units one by one. He gets to hers and begins to open it. But before he can, gunshots echo through the morgue. When the noise stops, the door swings open. It's Jin-man, Ji-yeon's uncle. He pulls her out and shields her eyes as they leave the morgue together. He drives her home. A month later, Jin-man and Ji-yeon are traveling by car. During the ride, he hands her a stuffed animal, her favorite. By morning, they arrive at Jin-man's house. Ji-yeon grabs her things and heads through the gate but trips and falls. Jin-man watches her for a moment before saying, "I'm not your father, and I never will be. I can't do the things your parents did for you." Hearing this, Ji-yeon picks herself up and keeps walking. At night, while his niece tosses and turns in her sleep, Jin-man recalls the doctor's words. She explained that Ji-yeon suffers from aphasia and dissociative amnesia. Overwhelmed with guilt, he leaves her room and repeatedly slaps himself in the face. At school, Ji-yeon's teacher informs Jin-man that although she performs well academically, her refusal to speak causes issues. She's bullied by other kids, who spread cruel rumors about her parents' deaths. One day, after hearing one of these rumors, Ji-yeon threw a chair at a boy. The teacher expresses concern, saying Ji-yeon struggles to fit in and has become an outcast. One rainy day, Ji-yeon walks home alone without an umbrella, while all her classmates are picked up by their parents. Jin-man eventually drives up beside her, but when she ignores him, he drives off, leaving her to walk the rest of the way. After that rainy walk, Ji-yeon falls ill. Over time, she adjusts to life with her uncle and begins communicating with him through notes left on the fridge. During another meeting at school, Jin-man tells the teacher that Ji-yeon needs to find her own way to handle the situation. One day, 3 classmates lock Ji-yeon in the school basement. At first, she doesn't react and just sits in silence. But as night falls, she sees the hyena again, this time with a severed human hand in its jaws. Terrified, Ji-yeon runs to the door, pounding on it and screaming for her uncle. Jin Man eventually arrives, frees her, and she collapses into his arms. Finally, she breaks down, crying and shouting all the things she's been holding in. She demands to know why he took so long to come back, why he was late that day. Jin Man, filled with regret, apologizes. Back home, Jin Man prepares a barbecue and invites Jian to join him. Tasting his food, she surprises him by saying it's delicious. In the present, Jian refuses to open the door for Min Hei, asking her to leave. She tells the woman that her uncle isn't home and won't be back tonight. Min Hei claims to know Jin Man, mentioning how much he talks about his smart, beautiful niece who studies at Seoul University. Jian immediately realizes she's lying. Disheartened, Min Hei walks back to her car and drives off. Shortly after, Jian receives another message from the same anonymous sender. Once again, the chilling text reads, "I want to kill you." She's snapped out of her thoughts by Jong Min, who has something to show her. He's hacked into the site operator's account and found a lot of surprising details. The site requires mandatory registration, and every member gets a unique code. Each code grants access to specific products for purchase. There are 4 types: the red code, for killers, who can buy guns, bombs, poisons, anything they need to kill. The purple code is for spies, who deal in information, surveillance equipment, hidden cameras, and basic weapons to take their own lives in case a mission fails. The yellow code is for cleaners, who provide cleaning supplies and services, as well as help to avoid justice. And then there's the 4th, the green code, which doesn't fit into any category. As he keeps reading, Jong Min sees that users with green codes are off limits for attacks. If anyone breaks this rule, the others must protect them. He scrolls further and discovers that only 2 people have been assigned the green code: Jin Man and Jian. The girl struggles to accept the fact that her uncle ran a weapons store, but before she can process it, an explosion shakes the place. They rush into the large room, only to find the fence around the house has been destroyed. Moments later, drones armed with machine guns appear outside the windows. They begin firing at the glass, and the friends drop to the floor in panic. But then they realize the glass is bulletproof. Struggling to get back up, the girl drags Jong Min to the back door. When they open it, they face another drone. In terror, they slam the door shut, but within seconds, the drone opens fire again. Looking at the bullet marks on the door, they realize the house is well protected. Returning to the hall, the friends watch the remaining drones outside the window. Suddenly, the drones spit out black sticky devices onto the glass, and within seconds, they explode. The blast throws Jian and Jong Min backward, and the glass shatters to the floor. Jian manages to reach her room, but Jong Min ends up right in the line of fire. Barely able to crawl to the next room, he spots a metal cabinet and hides inside. The drone that follows him enters, scanning the room, and concludes that he must be hiding in the cabinet. It opens fire with a machine gun on the reinforced door, then shoots a sticky explosive. As soon as it detonates, the door blows off, and Jong Min is exposed. Just then, Jian bursts into the room and uses a slingshot to knock the drone down. As it falls to the floor, she finishes it off with a chair. A group of men gathered around a campfire is discussing their work and personal lives when a man named Kim approaches. They greet him with respect. He pulls out a knife, makes a small cut on his arm, and removes a chip. One of the men asks if everyone else should do the same. Kim replies that it's up to each individual, but personally, he wants to get rid of his code. With a loud shout, another man enters. He's a killer who had been hunting little Jian. Sung Jo asks everyone to show their weapons. After inspecting them, he announces to the group, anyone who finds or kills Jin Man's niece will receive a reward. The crowd cheers and eagerly piles into a van. Do you think it would have been easier for Jian if she had found out about his enemies and his business sooner? Would she have accepted what he does? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.